The reason for saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening is the time span of debate should run from video conference centres. It's 8 a.m. here in New York, it's 1 p.m. in the UK, if I've got my calculations right, 2 p.m. in Paris, 5:30 in Bangalore, and 9 p.m. in Seoul. And we are covering all of these and more. Because of those who will join us through the video stream, we will have an even greater time span. We have around 30 debaters joining us from 16 WebSuite and Polycom centres around the world. I encourage all participants to join in whatever way to tweet their comments and use the hashtag EFF14. Those comments will be gathered, looked at, and play a part in the conversations that we have. So we look forward to your comments and questions, and we look forward to the discussion ahead. One last thing is, as people are making interventions in discussion, do be brief and concise in what you say, just so that we can get as many voices heard and we can keep the discussion going. That would be helpful. But to get us underway, let's go first to a short opening video which tells us something about the SDGs and the part we might play in making them come about. Roll film.
How would you like to be changed? How can we even ask this? There are so many problems. No one would say the same thing. This is Fernando. He is a little orphan boy from Brazil who lives in slum. He would change the world by making sure everyone has electricity. But his big request is that he be given a chance to make some money so he can change the future for himself and his friends. Tina is working for a supermarket in the UK. She buys vegetables from all over the world and needs a good price so she can stay in business. But she wants to be fair to the farmers she buys from. It makes no sense to her to see so much food thrown away each week. Granny is a little girl in India. She would have a well in her village for clean water. And the road to her school would always be clear. Weather patterns have changed recently, so nobody knows when the floods are coming. Amal is in Somalia. Illegal trawling and chemical pollution in the oceans means he can't catch any fish, so he's got no job. Amal just wants to feed his family again. And Eugenie, she's an old lady from Louisiana, USA. She wants to afford the medicine she needs, but if she really tells the truth, she just wants fairness. Her whole life been unfair because she is a woman and because she's black. How should you change the world? The question our governments have been asking for a long time. They talk and talk and talk for many, many years because, like I said, nobody says the same thing. But then, despite their differences, they did it. They agreed on new goals. They called them the Sustainable Development Goals, and they cover all these things for everyone. 17 goals, 17 dreams, 17 things that they all signed their name to say they agree. These goals aren't big, they are huge. They are ambitious and they are wild. But they are not just the fantasies of a child. This is all the leaders and all the people with the money and power saying, yes, this is possible, this is happening, this is achievable within our lifetime. Our leaders are saying this, but this is our future, so it's our responsibility to make sure it's not just fancy words, that these dreams will become a reality. We've got to hold them to it, to make sure we, and all the places we live in, demand they keep their promises. We've got to join together, we've got to make some noise, because this is our future, and it's the one we all want.
Thank you. That's, I think, a nice start, and I think sets the tone, which is this is not an academic discussion, or certainly not an academic discussion alone, but it's about the part that we all can play in achieving those goals. To take us forward in our discussion, I'm delighted now to welcome Dr. Carolina Belalcázar Canal from UNESCO, who will talk a bit about UNESCO's relationships and responsibilities with regard to these goals. Carolina.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. It's a pleasure for UNESCO to be joining Education Fast Forward today and to be welcoming with all of you this very important debate on the UN post-2015 development agenda, giving particular attention to the role of education in this new endeavor. Having this debate today is quite significant because we know that starting tomorrow, the UN General Assembly at its 70th session will consider and adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Among the 17 goals proposed, we have the goal 4, dedicated to education, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. UNESCO, at its General Conference this coming November, will confirm leading and coordinating the 2030 Education Agenda, now called the Framework for Action Education 2030. This in collaboration with co-convening agencies, including UNDP, the United Nations Population Fund, UNHCR, UNICEF, UN Women, and the World Bank, and key stakeholders with whom we will be collaborating to assist and support countries in the implementation and monitoring of this education goal. When looking back at the Education for All movement, and agreed upon in Dakar in 2000, and way back going to Jomtien in 1990, we see that the 2030 Education Agenda is providing a wider focus on access involving all levels of education, yet with particular attention given to equity, inclusion, quality education, and to a lifelong learning approach in which bridges are built across various learning dimensions. As a way to open this debate, I'd like to emphasize 3 points. We know that the education goal is vital in moving forward the overall Sustainable Development Agenda. This because we know of the unique role that education plays in transforming individuals and societies and in helping other development sectors make progress. We know the potential that education has in creating equal socioeconomic and political opportunities that empower individuals and societies to flourish. Education increases people's choices to improve their well-being and that of others. Education is in itself a human right, yet it is also part of the core process leading to human development. Nevertheless, and that's my second point, is education is and cannot be alone in pursuing this. Rather, education must work together with other development sectors so that the 3 pillars underlying the overall Sustainable Development Agenda are sustained, are kept, or strengthened, meaning economic growth, economic development, social development, and the very much needed environmental protection. In fact, one of the lessons that we have learned from the Education for All movement and the Millennium Development Goals is that the education agenda needs to work together within an international development framework and not separately from it. It is important to remember, and this is the last point, my third point, that these international development discussions and their conclusions, these goals that we have with us today, are not so new. We're carrying forward and building on prior agendas and frameworks, which despite the progress that they have made, have yet plenty to accomplish in reducing inequality and disparity in our societies. For example, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which is still pending to be fully respected, promoted, and protected in what pertains to the most fundamental human rights and freedoms for each and every individual. This among other international legal instruments and conventions, and the conventions being legally binding. We can also go back to the early 1990s, in which we have very comprehensive objectives of human development being put forward by the international community, also with the aim of achieving equal and just societies. So as a way to open this debate, I would like to leave you with a question, with a challenge, which was also addressed in the video at the end, is how do we act upon these very eloquent and mindful words that we are agreeing upon today in consensus in this new agenda? How do we translate them into action to accomplish a better world in the next 15 years that we have in front of us? It is imperative that we act upon what we already know is needed for change, collectively mobilizing the further required political will and the financial resources to be used where they're needed the most so that we can indeed move forward. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Carolina. Helpful start and a helpful context for the discussion ahead. With that, I'd like now to move to my left to Karen Cator, who's the CEO of Digital Promise, and we'll pick up, I think, on a number of those points. Karen.
Pick up from there.
Hey, Karen,
Yes.
I just want to mess it up a bit because it's meant to be a debate, so I thought I'd just throw a little thing in to give you a little bit of incentive. We've already had Twitter reach to over 1.4 million people.
All right, there
So
you
this
have
is
it.
so people are taking this matter very seriously by that reach. So yeah, no pressure on you now, but I thought I'd just mention that.
It's all right. No, this is incredibly important, and kicking off with Carolina is very, very helpful, and thank you very much. Thank you to EFF for having this debate, and I think it will end up being more of a conversation than a debate, because I think we will all be in sort of pretty strong agreement on many of the things. Maybe we'll have some new ideas or fresh ideas about how we can actually make this happen. Also, thank you to Polycom for hosting us here and making this the ability to talk with each other here and across the world incredibly important. It's a beautiful day here in New York City, I will tell you that. It's gorgeous. The Pope is here, a lot of hope in the streets. There you have it. So, so this is really important. The sustainable development goals, they do have number 4 that is specifically focused on education. But what I would say is that education is the pathway to all of the sustainability goals, that they're all incredibly important, and that through education, we can make progress on many of them. So we always say that education is incredibly important for economic development, global security, social justice, to give people a sense of a productive future, to help people find their way out of poverty. Really important. Education for every single person on the planet is a critical need today. So when we think about quality education, we also think then about these sustainability goals, and we can in fact use education to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. Education today can be powered up by technology. So technology is clearly not as we say, the quote unquote silver bullet, but it is incredibly helpful, and we can use technology to support the work that's happening across the world. The proliferation of mobile devices, helping people connect with each other, being able to push content, provide many resources, we should be able to leverage that, use that to support the education goals that we have. Some of the other things that technology will bring us, we can create simulations and animations and visualizations of very complex concepts. We can leverage big data sets, whether it be climate data or GPS data or whatever the data might be. We can use that data to help us create models and solve problems. We can use accessibility technologies so that people with disabilities or who may have other reasons why they can't connect the way we all do, we can use new emerging accessibility technologies so everyone can participate. Another incredibly important part of the technology play here. Adaptive learning environments, things that respond and provide personalized, more connected feedback is another. And finally, I would say what we're doing here today, the opportunity to have virtual exchanges to connect people across borders, even if they are not able to fly or travel. The sense of people growing up with global competence has never been more important, and that's another thing that technology can help us with. We've been talking about the digital learning gap, this gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it definitely starts with access. So access is the first part of this gap. But the second part is participation. We were talking recently about the fact that in the United States, there are about 100 million people who are not yet connected. That's almost a third of Americans. And it's not because they don't have access necessarily. It's because they don't know how or why to participate. So really important that everybody learns how to participate, to access information for their own health, for the purposes of community development, access to government services, and the like. But the third part of the gap, I would say, is where we want to get to with the sustainability goals. And that is that we need everybody to understand how to leverage the power of technology to support their own education and to solve complex problems. So, to wrap this up, I would say that in the context of this, what we need to do is engage our students in solving these goals. I looked at the 17 goals and I thought, here is a high school curriculum right here for us. If we developed and designed a high school or a curriculum for young people, our emerging adults, the people who will be 25 to 35 in the year 2030, and they will be our emerging leaders. If we can engage them today in looking at these goals and designing solutions, developing solutions, and not only developing solutions, but publishing those, sharing those, and then taking action, that's where we think that the change will happen. And we think that that is a worthy step for us in education to take. Engage the hearts and minds of the young people today in engaging with and solving the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Karen, excellent. Thank you very much. I think there is a challenge there, and I think we'll be digging deeper into that as we go. Jim, should I come to you now?
I think so, because it's like we have a problem in Cairo with Dr. Shawky's connection. We did have a bit of a problem yesterday, so we did have a chat about what he might say. So I might try to be a proxy for him if I can.
I'm sure you'll add a bit too.
It's interesting. I want to pick up on Carolina's point about specific action, and Karen's point about the curriculum. I was so pleased that you said that, because the conversations I've been having with Tarek in Egypt. Tarek is the Secretary General of the President's Specialized Councils in Egypt, and he specifically runs the one for the future of education, but looks after others around social cohesion and economic development. In fact, those are the three headings. If you look at the SDGs, you see that it's a bit of a pyramid, and at the top, the targets all around economic, social development and the environment. And I love what, and Tarek I know does too, the next layer down, the 5 Ps, which I think everybody should know instantly, of people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. I wondered, Karen, whether that should be the curriculum for all of our schools on the planet going forwards, and we don't see math for our American friends.
No, it's mathematics.
It's mathematics,
It's
yeah.
not math. Come on, get it right.
Yeah, as a math graduate, yeah. It's always seemed false, and Tarek would be saying this, to see individual subjects in silos on a curriculum. None of us have really ever understood why that's that way. But if we took the 5 Ps as the curriculum, and we want to talk about water, I can't remember which target that is, underneath the heading of planet and people, to understand the mathematics of water, the physics of water, would give reality and authenticity to the curriculum. And I think in that way, and it would give people an enthusiasm to actually want to get deeper into the curriculum, because it would affect everybody on the planet. And at the end of the video, it said, this isn't about some important people sitting in a room, it's about targets for all of us. But already on Twitter, people are saying that the goals won't work. And I think we've got to change some hearts and minds. So what's actually happening in Egypt is that they're changing the curriculum for teachers to look at teacher behaviors for what will make a good teacher, by not looking at skills necessarily only, but looking at the sorts of behaviors that would show you what a modern teacher in this century would look like. So I think it feels like the planets are aligning. Tarek would say the same. But as in Egypt, they're looking at these councils that Tarek runs, are looking at all aspects of the society in Egypt, not just one, and working together. So I think working together, Gavin, is the message. And the other message is you know, are these 5 Ps actually, if we go forward 5 years and look back, might there be some schools with a 5P curriculum rather than the curricula that we have today?
Excellent, Jim. And I think that's it's very interesting. And I think the link through to skills and behaviours is interesting too. And I wonder, actually, Andres, if that's something you, given the work that you've done on skills and how you, I wonder how that plays into your view of skills and whether there's a fit there.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I agree entirely with Jim. Whenever we present or frame goals, we risk to frame them in the past and to do more of the same. And I think this is really an opportunity for people to think forward. How is the world going to look like? What kind of knowledge, skills, and character attribute are going to be required from people? Now, I think one thing is very clear. The future is not going to reward people just on what they know in different silos. The future is about, having that kind of compass that tells you what is right and wrong and where to go, and having the navigation skills to work through an increasingly volatile, complex, and ambiguous world. And I think that's going to be the metric on which the future in 15 years' time will evaluate the success of those goals, not about how many children are in what type of institutions and how many teachers did we hire. But I think what this tells us is that we really need to work hard on framing, what are the kind of outcomes that we value? What are the learning environments that we need to design to get us there? And what is very clear is that learning is no longer a place. It's an activity that cuts through everything. The last point I want to make, and that's maybe something that didn't come across so clear, is to see those goals in combination. You can have great skills, but if you live in an economy that is not extracting good value from those skills, it's not going to help you. We have in many countries this kind of mismatch between the kind of skills and knowledge people have and what their societies require. And we need to work on both ends of the spectrum, making sure that people you can activate can basically contribute to the world, but also making sure that the way we design labor markets and societies actually make good use of the talent of people.
Thank you, Andres. I think that's, and I know I've seen the figures recently. You're talking about the countries that actually are really successful at using the skills available, and there are countries that are much less successful, and that kind of plays into that same argument, I think. I'd like to turn to Alison, which may be a surprise to Alison. Sorry. But just given Alison has been working on the world's largest lesson, and this, so I'm interested to know how that is going along, and also, just a brief description of it and how that's playing out. And is it picking up on somewhere on these skills and the application, as well as perhaps the content that's associated with the SDGs?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that what it really picks up on is Karen's points earlier. Just as a bit of background, I've been working for a year now as part of the Global Goals campaign, which has the ambition of sharing the global goals to everyone on the planet within 7 days. Obviously, it's an enormous ambition. We won't achieve it, but we'll achieve an enormous amount. And I can tell you even that over the next 3 days, 1 billion people will receive text messages that tell them that the goals have been announced, that there is a new ambition for people and planet, and that we need to work together to make sure they're achieved. So that's just one example of the work that we've been doing to communicate the goals. My particular piece of it is called the world's largest lesson. And our ambition is to encourage schools across the world to teach a lesson about the goals everywhere. We've created some wonderful learning resources to do that, that are really engaging. And just tapping into what Karen was saying, it's about, from our perspective, engaging a new generation in the idea that we can make a better place to live for ourselves, we can treat each other in a better way, and we can look after the place we live for the future. To do that in a creative and kind of appealing way, so that they become engaged in development issues, so that they even take part, follow causes that they're passionate about, and get involved. Just the last 6 months of engagement with ministries of education and organisations really demonstrate how passionate people are to take advantage of this moment in time, to really kickstart a new movement in education for children, understanding their place in the world, seeing that they're part of a bigger community, and really wanting to be part of that. So I would absolutely encourage anybody to use this moment to trigger children's involvement, and to use it as almost step one for considering, back to the points about curriculum development, to considering whether you could create curriculums around it. I've been living and breathing the goals for a year and thinking about how they could be communicated through learning resources, and the more you get into it, the more you can see that there is a way to do it, and you could create a curriculum around it. It's very hard to create curriculum change in a traditional fashion, but maybe you come at it completely fresh and start again and rethink. And it could be an amazing future for this day, looking forward, and what we might achieve over the next 15 years.
I really like that, because I think it is a question of the relationship between the goals and education, which cuts both ways.
Yeah.
So that education should affect the goals, and the goals should affect education.
Absolutely. Just we've been testing our resources with children, seeing how they respond to it, and they just love the completeness of the goals. They're a very comprehensive set of ambitions for the world, and they are very interdependent with one another. And children love the fact that you can think about one goal and then think about the impact chain of addressing one goal and then seeing what positive impact happens when you do one thing. So they love that, and there's something fantastic about how you might turn that into some really incredible learning for them as they go forward.
Thank you, Alison. Mario, I know you'd like to come in.
Yes. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, everybody. I see many nice and knowledge faces I know for some time. I only want to add to the discussion two aspects. One is underline the importance I think there is in the education, in the overall sustainable development goals. I think there is a mistake in the document of the United Nations, to be provocative, because they base the sustainable development goals in 3 pillars: economic, social, and environment. The 3 E's. I think they forget the 4th E, which is the most important, which is education. Because without education, will be very difficult to develop the sustainable development goals in a knowledge society. The second aspect, not so provocative, and to answer to the questions raised by Karen and by other people spoke, I think we in the last 10 or 15 years, we discuss a lot about the 21st century skills. I think we should go beyond that, not forget the 21st century skills like collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity, but I think we should create a kind of 21st century literacies. The literacy of water, the literacy of energy, the literacy of entrepreneurship, the literacy of coding. I think one of the problems of technologies when we assess the role of technologies in education is because the assessment is based in a 20th century education. One exception for Schneider, Andreas, because, for example, in the last PISA, I saw mathematics already include the use of tools, and not only to understand the concepts. Is a very, in my point of view, one of the best achievements in the late discussion on assessment. Then OECD includes not only the old tradition vision, what the people should know, but also how they use tools to manage what they know. Okay, but beyond that, I think we need to go further to the water literacy, energy literacy, and all the 17 goals, literacies, because if we go to work together for next 15 years in the new development agenda, we need a generation who understand with scientific knowledge what these 17 goals mean in terms of literacy. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Andres, I don't know if you want to come back on any of that since.
Yeah, I think I'm in two minds about that. On the one hand, I think a strong emphasis on 21st century thinking is really important. And again, but the risk is if we add more and more to our school curricula, that we end up with this mile-wide, inch-deep curricula, where we teach a lot of things with a very limited depth. And actually, what I think we shouldn't forget is that in the end, what counts is the depth of thinking that students can demonstrate. It's sometimes better to focus on fewer things, teaching it more deeply, so that students have those kinds of skills. And we should, I think, also not forget the social and emotional dimension of skills. Some people call it character. This is about, curiosity. It's about resilience. It's about adaptability. It's about leadership. It's about those kinds of empathy, the capacity of people to collaborate, compete, connect. And I think we must not forget those kinds of attributes by adding more and more topics to the curriculum. Jim made a point earlier, we should probably get away from curricular silos, teach a lot more in integrated ways, but not load more stuff on what students learn, but rather strengthen the depth and strengthen the kind of social and emotional dimension. That's at least my view, and that's actually the way in which PISA is going. Like, we are putting a lot of emphasis on the 21st century skills agenda. Global competencies is going to be one of our main focuses. Social competencies is going to be part of this. But the priority really is on the depth of skill rather than on, adding environmental literacy, financial literacy, and all of those kinds of things.
I think there's an awful lot
But
in
I know
that,
people
which
are in two minds about that, and I'm too. I think there is always a tension between the depth and the breadth of what you want students to learn.
Yeah, I think there's also contextualization, which is about where different people in different countries and different regions and locations in different countries, and some things are more relevant to their education than others. And actually how you dig deeply and how you enable the students to make choices, so they are digging deeply in the places that they want to, is part of the discussion.
Gavin, as an ex maths teacher, I wonder how many people on the conference today have divided two numbers in the last month by hand? Has anybody divided two numbers by? Mario, I don't believe you. I really just don't believe you, Mario. Now, you know the point I'm making. It's
I only
exactly
divide by 10 because the Portuguese deficit.
But
Elaine,
the curriculum's littered with things that people would say you should absolutely have to have in there, and we never use them again.
I think that's absolutely right. You need to get back into doing things differently. Now, I know that we have a number of people wanted to come in, and I saw you there, Vera, so we'll come in just a minute. But Elaine, first.
I'm listening to, this is my first time in one of these debates, and I'm listening to all the things that you're saying, and lucky for me, I get to span across the globe and go into different classrooms. And I was just telling Karen before, she's an ex-teacher from Alaska, have a great example. They're doing exactly what everyone is talking about. And I read in the document that we will tell a story, and I'll try to be quick about it, but I've been working with this school in Alaska for 5 years. And basically what happens in this school, we have two world history teachers team teaching. And basically their motto is that, we find that expert to come in and teach the topic that they're the best at. So what happens is the first month of every year, it's on the job training for these students. They come in and they learn all about these technologies that we're using today. And then they have like an etiquette, because it's a video conferencing course. So once that happens, then they break out into groups, so that two students are working together with another two students in another school. And they come to class in the morning, and they get on their the computer, and they go into a virtual meeting room. They go into Google's Doc, and if they have a question, they connect. The back channel is to connect by Microsoft Link to their instructor and say, hey, can you drop into virtual meeting room 123? And they come in, they do their business until it's time to present. And they have to do this lesson plan for about a month. And they get up and they do like we would do as professionals. They get up and they do a presentation using video conferencing and smart boards and PowerPoints and Prezi. And we have students coming in from, iPhones and iPads. And these students are used to, this is 21st century learning. Well, it's gone a step further now, and they are just what you're talking about, you know, the last comments, is they're doing something called, they're getting a certification to use this technology, and they're bringing in experts and some experts from our team in government, healthcare, and education to talk about goals. And I've started to blog about that. And these students are so excited. You know, one of the questions I posed to them was, if you could, you know, develop technology, what technology would you develop and what functions would it have? So these students are sending me these emails and this thinking deeper in what you want to have the students accomplish. So they're sending me these ideas, and I'm saying, look, Google this. This already exists. Think a little harder on what we can create. And so they're sending me new stuff saying, well, what if we could do this for somebody who has disabilities, or how can we bring in other countries and give them access? So this is already happening now. And like Karen said, there's some places that really just haven't adopted it because it's not from the top down. But then there's others that it's 100% of their day connecting to different schools. And this particular school brings in Ghana, Afghanistan as part of their classroom curriculum. And they're getting a college credit for this. But the greatest thing about this is, we all know in education we lack the resources to help integrate technology in the classroom. So these kids are getting certified so they can now branch out throughout the school district and get those teachers using this, because really teachers would be more acceptable to using this technology if all they had to do was teach and not push the button to make it happen. And that's what's happening there.
I need to pick you up on one thing there. You said Karen was an ex-teacher. I think once a teacher, always a teacher.
Oh yeah, well,
And,
yeah.
I used to have I used to work with a member of staff who was very fond of saying, "Stand back, I'm a teacher," in the way that a doctor might in an emergency. Which I always quite like, but there we are.
Thank you.
Stand back, Karen's a teacher. Vera, you were wanting to come in.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm from Brazil, and I would like to talk about our perspectives here. Well, as you know, we are in the middle of an economic crisis, a very deep economic crisis, and it's spread to education, of course. Actually, the education crisis is happening before the economic crisis, but they link together. Well, I believe that, said that, we have to find a way to create a movement upon the new objectives of the millennium, because I believe that we are in a point where technology is being much more accepted, the changes in education have been much more accepted, and we see nowadays many discussions about how can we change education deeply in Brazil, because the way we are working, we are just getting a little better every year, and we are not changing what education is about. We have some resistance. I was involved in the movement for having the world class here in Brazil, and we don't find much interest in the schools and in the government especially in making things different. So this is a movement that is not really reaching the schools. So my point is that we are now in a new moment. We have to create a mobilization. We have to keep this mobilization in order to bring schools and to bring systems to the change and to make it stable. And in order to maintain the movement, we have to act. And we have the technology, and I think that this is the challenge that we have from now on. We have the objectives, and we have to mobilize people in terms of achieving it.
Thank you, Vera. I think that's very opposite, and really a discussion about, actually,
She gets
do we all get a cup of coffee?
Vera, can we all have some of that coffee?
Where's our coffee? Make a comment. I think the service here is really not...
Muito obrigado.
Sorry, can I get anybody anything?
A cappuccino.
Sorry, no, excellent. I think the idea, don't try and hide it behind the sign. I know. I think it's excellent to be thinking of a movement, and actually it really is an opportunity. And I think that's a lot of what Alison's efforts and the whole idea of the world, the world's greatest lesson are about.
Yes.
So I think it is a fantastic opportunity and one that we should be picking up on. I'm going to jump to Canada and Michael and Liam, and I just wondered, from your points of view, how is all this fitting, and what are you seeing from your work, which is more with the youth, not more with the youth, in a different way with youth education?
Thanks, Gavin. It has been really exciting to listen to the conversation so far, especially because for 15 years, I think this has really been at the heart of our work, is really trying to empower youth and students and educators around the world to understand and act on the world's greatest challenges. So we used the MDG framework before, and we're even more excited about how the global goals are articulating a lot of that even more clearly. Over the last year, we've also been excited to work with EFF and with Mary and Jim's support to launch the EFF Sprout Action Fund, which has helped 16 young people from 11 developing countries launch projects that have actually been working on these global goals all around the world in their countries. And we'll be excited to share a report on that that I'm sure will be on the site shortly. They're just now reporting on the activities they've been developing. Actually, this weekend we have 6 students who are accrediting to attend the UN Summit on the SDGs. And where, as part of a youth movements initiative, we've been trying to work across nonprofits and education, working with groups like the IB and UN Habitat, to really try to celebrate and showcase what people are doing around the world as exemplars to address these goals. And so as part of our Youth Movements Initiative, we're actually launching a Global Goals portal to really help make it easy for educators, for NGOs, for all these different people to understand and showcase the activity they're developing. And I think to build on Andreas's comments, I think one of the key things we need to do is really support educators to bring this in the classroom. I love how Karen kind of articulated it. I think bringing these challenges, these goals, these issues into everyday practice, into our curriculum. We've been really trying to nurture a community called Education for Social Innovation, which is helping educators within their existing curriculum, not adding extra work or kind of splitting it up, but integrate this idea of student action, student advocacy into the curriculum. And I think it's key, especially as we talk about the kind of gap between skills and markets and the need to build these sustainable livelihoods, to empower students everywhere to look at opportunities to address these goals as social entrepreneurs, to launch their own ventures through things like the Sprout Fund. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is helping educators develop these skills, looking at design thinking as an approach to build empathy, looking at how we can foster creativity and confidence and character through entrepreneurship. Because I think we're going to need students to come up with creative solutions to these goals as much as we need them to participate in addressing them through other frameworks too, because I think we can't have enough innovation in the approaches we take. And I think the classroom is a great place to nurture that in alignment with the curriculum. So excited to be a part of the conversation and to really try to build these communities of practice for education around the world.
That's brilliant, Michael. Thank you. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Liam, or just say yes.
Absolutely, I'm good.
Thanks very much.
Been organizing those students who are at the UN, and I'm sure we'll see lots of blogs and tweets from those students as a UN accredited organization on the ground.
There's a great message there, I think, about joining up. Some great messages about the idea of movement. I think the way that we'll affect change is by working together, making things happen together, and taking responsibility on ourselves, not we talked about calling this debate, ask not what the world can do for you, but what you can do for the world. It's that kind of thing. We need to take responsibility on ourselves. Rio, I know you will have been dying to come in for some time now.
Hello, everyone. Very glad to be with you, as usual. Sure, Gavin, I can chip in a couple of thoughts. I mean, one of the things that struck me in the conversation so far is that goals are about the future, and goals provide us with an opportunity to ask questions about the future. And what I find striking is that we have this difficulty, I think, in sort of accepting with greater modesty the question of how we're going to achieve the goals. And I guess, most of the interventions that I've heard so far illustrate to me that we're struggling with this question of quality, what kind of skills, how to conduct them, the way in which we organize things, and, for instance, the model of the classroom, I just came from, to pick up the story thread, I just came from a meeting that UNESCO ran in Bangkok 2 weeks ago, where we brought together people from the informal education sector all across Asia. And I guess, you know, again, the issue for them was, are they defining their own agendas in terms of the formal sector, in terms of trying to achieve targets for the formal sector? Obviously, a results-based perspective, which provides very clear indication of progress, or were they really thinking about how well-being was being created in their communities, how learning, rather than education per se, was a critical component of their heritage, of their way of thinking about resilience and sustainability, and learning by doing. And so I hope that the conversation that we have here will contribute to going beyond the announcement effect of saying, oh, isn't it great that we have goals, and push us to really question how we're going to achieve those goals, particularly since I think, and it's already been mentioned, the broad coverage of these goals does suggest that we want to pay some attention to holistic thinking, and we understand that these things can't be put into silos, as Andrea said, and that puts a new challenge on us, which I think is you know, a historical type of challenge, which is, can we be as innovative in institutional transformation as our predecessors were when they established the universal compulsory schooling classroom system that we know today? And there's some of you who've heard me put this challenge before, but I think once again, the Sustainable Development Goals call upon us not to feel complacent about having set goals or knowing that we just have to speed up implementation, but rather to question how we're doing it. Thank you.
I think that's really good, and it is to me really at the heart of this is actually challenging the way that we're conducting education today, thinking about doing it differently, and an opportunity, perhaps, because the goals are there, to strike off in a slightly different, not actually a fundamentally different direction. And as Jim was saying earlier about going to those 5 elements and building. I'd rather not say building a curriculum, actually building how we're learning through those real elements. Tim,
Gavin, can I interrupt?
No, you can't. You can just speak, because I was just inviting you.
Thank you. This is not a debate.
No,
we have a massive euphoria about the SDGs, which are fundamentally flawed. Let's please get real. I could talk about the SDGs or education, but you won't give me enough time to do both. So let me just draw comrades' attention to 4 problems with the SDGs. There are far too many goals and far too many targets, 169. You're a minister in a poor state. How on earth are you going to get your head around that and actually try to do? How many of us can know more than 5 goals or 25 targets? Let's get real. Even the UN's 2014 report on the MDGs said, and I quote, substantial progress has been made in most areas, but much more effort is needed to reach the set targets. If we can't deliver on 8, how the hell are we going to deliver on 17? Secondly, we know that target setting is hugely problematic in its own sense. It diverts resources to the targets rather than things that might actually change and make things effective. Thirdly, and I go back to Carolina at the beginning, and you said economic growth, economic development, your first two points. These processes are concerned with reducing absolute poverty, not relative poverty. And it's relative poverty that matters. We cannot get rid of poverty. Poverty is with us always. We can reduce poverty. Education, of course, is important for that. But the SDG agenda, it is crass and naive to think it will get rid of poverty. It won't. And I hate to say it, and I think we're all part of the conspiracy. The 4th point, these goals and targets represent the interests of those organisations, primarily UN organisations, which are concerned with their own self-interest and survival. Those who drove the SDG agenda aren't the poorest and the most marginalised people. How many of them were involved? This is about global institutions remaining the same and not fundamentally changing the structures of our world that we need to do if poverty is to be eliminated. So that's enough on the SDGs. Later I can come back on education But given the problems with the SDGs, we should forget about them, just get on and be assured in delivering support for those people who really want to learn about how to make the world a better place. That's what education and learning is about. I
think for me, Tim, that's a great intervention. And I think we do need to actually challenge all of these things all of the time. And for me, though, what is really encouraging, because maybe I'm just at the top of the glass and you're near the bottom or whatever, Tim, but maybe you're just getting tired of lack of progress. But I want to try to bring some threads together, because Riel talked about the industrialization of education. And what we did was we took people who'd been to university with degrees in mathematics, and they taught mathematics. And we took people with degrees in history, and they taught history. There's a natural flow into what happened in the classroom. And Riel, I was hoping you were going to say something about the authenticity that was watered down to the point of where you couldn't see it, where the world of work was watered down into school and disappeared, and the ability to take learning out of school back into into life, and to look upon this century as the learning century rather than any other type of century. It's a learning century. And the trick in all of this, and I wish we had South Korea on, but Seong, I think we've just had a technical problem. Something hasn't worked. If you look at where South Korea was back in the 60s, I think, Andreas, you'll tell me that its GDP was the same as Burkina Faso. And the World Bank said, let's turn South Korea into the world.
This was before the MDGs, by the way.
There was life before and there'll be life after, Tim. But they said, let's help develop your economy because you're really good at growing rice. And the South Koreans said, no, we want to learn about why we're good at growing rice and apply that learning to other industries, and the rest is history. So I think learning about why things haven't worked is what we're about. Now, one last thing, if I may. I used to be a head teacher, and I abandoned the curriculum for my 11-year-olds. Always a head teacher. Give me a stage. But I abandoned the curriculum for a year for 11-year-olds, and we ran what we call the Learning to Learn year. No subjects on the curriculum at all. When I left, the new head teacher, who was half my age, went back to subjects. There's a real issue here that we often eat our own dog food. We go and see great teachers in great schools, and they represent 2.5% of the teachers on the planet, say, and the other 97% still want to teach mathematics and history. We need to, Michael, you do great things, but how on earth do you do it? We need to tell people what are the examples of change. Ramji, you've trained 500,000 teachers in India, or whatever the number is. How have you done it? We need to spread these messages so that we don't end up in another year having the same debate. I think where Tim's frustration is. I actually think that SDGs can live and can work, but we need to change how we tackle them. I don't think there's anything wrong with the 179 goals either.
I think there's something. There's a different way of looking at this. We can look at the top-down SDGs, or we can look at it as an opportunity for us to take advantage of the fact that they're there, and to change things within education as a result.
Can I say something, Gavin?
Yes, Kathy.
I just want to say, in the real world, entrepreneurs set goals. They set goals, and along the path to reach those goals, things change. They have to have a little bit of risk tolerance. They have to be prepared to go different paths, different routes to actually achieve the goals. And the goals may change in the process as well. So I think in education, perhaps what we're being asked to do now is be a little bit more entrepreneurial, be a little bit more flexible and adaptable as we think about these goals, which I think are wonderful, by the way, because they do give us a target. As we sort of, head out, the stars are aligned. We have a moment in time when we can really do exciting things and bring about a lot of good change for the next generation. But I think we need to think a little bit more like entrepreneurs.
I think that's right.
If I might,
I'm going to go to Ramji.
Sorry, Gavin, can I just a little piece on that? I think that there's the issue, the macro and micro of this, which is we're dealing with this at a collective and institutional level. And we're dealing it at the level of actual production, so actual activities, and at the level of the individual. So we have really macro, meso, and micro, 3 levels of analysis. And the issue of entrepreneurship is important at each level, but the question of systems experimentation, the willingness to create context where people can experiment and fail at the institutional level, at the micro level, is really one of the critical enabling discussions around the question of changing how we achieve the goals. So I think it's important to focus on things like entrepreneurship, but to understand entrepreneurship in a systemic perspective where the failure of one experiment doesn't jeopardize the entire system. And to understand that there are incentives that are quite complex for us. They're emergent in terms of how people behave and how they think. And we have changing conditions of change today around that issue. And that goes very much to the point that Jim raised about this shifting of our expectations around the relationship between one of the central institutions of the modern era and what's becoming of the world today.
Thanks, Riel. I just want to add one thing to that. What that reminds me of, and I was reflecting on this last night, is some of you will know that, and I've mentioned it before, that in Denmark they've been working on access to the internet during high-stakes exams for some 10, probably 15 years now. It started with access to CD information and then became the internet. But they brought the population with them. And a couple of years ago, there was an issue, as I understand it, in Denmark, where they, some of the students were found to, and I'm not quite sure how this works when you have access to the internet, but cheated, not quite played the game in terms of the rules of the game. And when that happened, the press came out and said, we have to ask better questions, which was, I think, a fantastic result, which was a demonstration of a kind of maturity with regard to the use of technology, with regard to 21st century skills, because if you have access to the internet during high-stakes exams, what questions would you ask?
Right.
It can't be questions of state a few facts.
Right.
It has to be searching for information, validating that information to see that it is true and worthwhile, and then constructing it into compelling arguments. And those, to me, encapsulate, without calling them 21st century skills, exactly the kind of skills we need. With that, and John Connell, just so you know, I'm going to come to you shortly, but for a little bit of feedback on where Twitter is taking us. But just before that, Ramji, do you want to reflect on some of this from your point of view?
Well, you know, I think the key issues have been covered and brought out. From where I sit in India, you know, you're talking about a very large country with, you know, steeped in a lot of problems. That's not news to anyone. The question is, or the challenge is, if I were the Prime Minister, how do you bring about change without creating too much disruption? You know, it's one thing to say, I will change everything, and if you don't change, I'll shoot you or hang you, right? And another where you say, I've got to create that change. It can't be too slow. I've got to have a reasonable pace of change, but how do I do it within the system? So that's really the skill of anyone who wants to bring about a movement or create change at the level of the government or run an NGO or be an entrepreneur if you want to scale it up across India. So in the early days of when I started our foundation, the former chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission said, you know, Ramji, we've had so many experiments in India. Wonderful, innovative stuff. But none of them ever achieved critical mass. And he was using a nuclear analogy of how you achieve the chain reaction, right? And he said, we never got to that. And I really don't know why we haven't got to that. So in terms of what you're doing, if you break through that and create a chain reaction, then I would say that's really, really a huge breakthrough. So that's what sort of obsesses me. And we've done a lot of work, as Jim was saying, working with huge numbers of children and teachers and so on as an institution. But in the larger context, when anyone asks me, you know, they say, you must be really satisfied, you must be really fulfilled in having done this work. And yeah, at one level, that's true. But the real aim is, how do you trigger a massive chain reaction across the system, right? So I think, you know, there is some hope, and it's taken about 15 years to get to where we are. And I've been talking to members of the government. They're beginning to respond to it. But there's something interesting that a very senior member of the state government of Karnataka told me once. He said, look, what's exciting about what you're doing is, in some ways it's very radical. It's very different. It's the opposite of the system. And yet, introducing into the system, I can do it without disrupting the system. Because if you came up with an idea that said, this is the best thing, but you've got to change the whole system, forget it. It isn't happening in our lifetimes, right? So how can you bring about those radical innovations and introduce them without getting the system to have to rethink or redefine itself, at least in phase 1? And then we'll worry about phase 2 and phase 3. So more like a Trojan horse approach. And we don't have time to go into all of that, but I think we've come up with some approaches of how you do that. And that becomes very important. Then you have to celebrate success. If you want to motivate somebody in India and there's an article about your organization in the US or the UK or Brazil or somewhere else, then they begin to wonder, hey, how come we're not, doing what the others are saying is great? So you've got to play one off against the other. There's got to be a certain amount of visibility, connectivity, experimentation on the ground, exciting stuff. It is a complex thing, but it's doable. I believe it's doable.
I think it's so true, and forgive me commentating on Agastya, but the Agastya Foundation, I think, for me, was unusual. It started from the point of view of should we be creating our own schools, quickly left that behind, and instead created its innovative approaches, and then worked with the existing school systems. So it's bringing in children and teachers,
right.
And the children go away to learn things that they wouldn't just have the opportunity to do in school at all.
Yeah.
And the teachers are taken in to go through teacher training,
right.
Teacher development opportunities,
right.
Teacher training.
So at one level, it is about creating that change. At the other, as Andreas and others said, we are just pumping schools with so much curriculum. We all get sort of frozen in the headlights. This is happening in the US, or this is happening in Japan or in Korea. So get the kids here to start learning, 10x. And that's going to lead to nowhere because no one can be trained so quickly to do all that. So you really need to apply the 80-20 principle, which is true about most things in life, and say, what are the 20% of things that are going to have 80% of the impact? And let's try and focus on that. And within that, go in depth. It's about how to think and how to act. So what are those core skills, ways of thinking and action that are really important, that become then universal and you can apply it in any context? I mean, that's about the most you can do, and perhaps the greatest thing one can contribute, as opposed to saying, we have the greatest syllabus, or our kids coming first in math and physics and chemistry and all the rest of it, and then after 20 years you say, what was all that about? Nothing happened. Yeah. We're back to square one.
And just to contextualize it a little bit, how many children are you reaching a year approximately?
About 2 million.
About 2 million.
Right.
In very powerful ways, we think.
I would vouch for it. John, what are you picking up from the Twitter stream? And indeed,
hi, Gavin.
In your own mind.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Gavin. Can I first of all start by apologising for being the only one who doesn't have a bland corporate background behind me? But that's not a criticism. Just anyway. No, the discussion on Twitter in particular has been exceedingly rich, and I have no chance of capturing all but a few basic points, basically, that are being mentioned on the Twitter feed. We started with someone picking up on Carolina's point about how, yes, we do have new goals, but actually there are some old goals still outstanding, still pending, and particularly in terms of the Human Rights Declaration, and we can't afford to forget those. Michael mentioned that education increases people's choices to increase their well-being and that of others. I presume he was quoting someone there, but that's a point we need to keep in mind as well. Tim gave us an early warning on Twitter of his charge that perhaps this isn't so much a debate as a kind of extolling the virtues of SDGs. But having said that, when Tim came in with his contribution, the tenor of the points being made on Twitter did change, and that there is a certain amount of debate now happening, certainly on Twitter and, of course, in the debate itself. Youth movements made the point that the education goals within the SDGs are probably the keystone to unlocking all of the global goals, and that's a point worth debating itself, a point worth arguing. But it's certainly, I mean, education has to be at the heart of everything that we do. Where else are we? Digital Promise asked the question, or at least asked us to imagine designing a high school curriculum. I would actually extend that to the whole curriculum, but designing a high school curriculum around the global goals. How would we do that? Would we want to do that? And how would that match in with the point made by Andreas about making the curriculum too wide and not deep enough, the 1 inch deep curriculum? I think that's a key point. Some other interesting points, just to pick up on 1 or 2 disparate points. Lars Persson mentioned the point, and this is one I have a personal interest in. You know, he mentions that governments own education systems, local authorities or districts own the curriculum sometimes. The teacher owns how it is presented, but it's me, myself, I, who own my own learning. And we have to remember that changing the teaching doesn't necessarily change the learning, and we have to think very carefully about how we approach the whole question of what learning is and how we can help learners to learn by themselves and for themselves. I think that's about where it's got to so far, Gavin. There's a million tweets coming in every minute or two, and it's hard to keep track of them, but I'll try to gauge the tenor of them when I come back in about, an hour's time, well, about 3/4 of an hour's time. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great.
Can I make a very short comment?
You can give a comment.
Short comment.
Doesn't
So I
need to
just
be that
want to,
short.
so I just want to make one point, sort of summarizing Tim and Andreas and some of the comments that are on Twitter as well. And that is that, when we have these 17 goals, first of all, which ones should we delete, right? If you start looking at them, they are actually all important. The thing with education is we're so used to trying to say that every single person needs to focus and learn exactly the same things. So when we standardize, when we say everybody needs to learn all 17, go right. Deep or wide or whatever on 17 goals, I think that's the problem in our heads. What we need to do is engage students with those, the mindsets, the resilience, curiosity, critical thinking, problem solving, those kinds of things. Maybe not on every single one of them, but they need to go deep on some of them. So I wouldn't suggest, I think the goals are complete and they probably are pretty much everything that we need to focus on as a global society. But I don't think we need to suggest that every single person needs to get expert at all of them. We wouldn't do that as adults. We focus, we determine, we choose something. But if as an entire world, we had people focusing on each of those, and again, students as well, I think that would be a positive forward direction.
Thank you. I think that's a point well made. Yes.
Yes, thank you. This is Carolina here from UNESCO. It's following up on that comment from Tim in relation to the 3 pillars that are underlying the Sustainable Development Agenda when we talk about economic growth, social protection, social development, and environmental protection. I made that little addition of referring to economic development. And I think that one of those questions that we should also be asking ourselves, when Gavin was saying what kind of questions should we be asking in relation to how are we going to go forward with this agenda, we should look at how is it that we're making the best use of our resources. How are we going to be managing economic growth for the interest of the people? We're talking about a better, more equal distribution of resources. We're talking rather about economic development. We need to go beyond reaching and achieving higher incomes, and therefore having the skills to go beyond that as well. How are we going to allocate the few resources and the scarce resources that now, considering what's going on with climate change, how are we going to be using our resources? For example, also with military spending versus education. So that's a question that I'd like to leave with you.
That's an interesting question. I think there's some big things. I want to bring in Chelsea. Chelsea Wee.
Thanks, Gavin. And you can tell that I work for Karen and Digital Promise because Karen made the point that I was also thinking as we were talking about this dichotomy between skills and all of these topics that are introduced in the goals. And so I would only add to that I think I liked what Riel said about the 3 sort of levels that we can approach this conversation from, and from this sort of individual level, thinking about students at all ages. I think the goals present an opportunity for students to see a big picture about what is going on in our world and what are the challenges that we're facing, and then choose a path that really ignites their passions in order to build some of the skills and the knowledge that we're hoping that they gain through their schooling. So it's a real world and global perspective way to think about how students choose a path that really excites them.
I think it is about that bundle of choices, and I think it always should be about those choices. Mark. No, wrong, Mark. Wrong. Bob.
Sorry,
I shall go to Bob.
I'm another Mark.
You're another Mark.
I'm another Mark.
Do you want to come in here?
You're there, Mark. So
no, I'm just listening at the moment.
I've got something.
All right, it was you, Mark, that I was aiming this at, actually.
No
it was you. I thought you'd been quiet up until now, and we couldn't allow that for too much longer.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm coming at this from because I'm very much private sector. I would disagree with an earlier comment that I'm the only person without a bland corporate background. I'm definitely no corporate in me at all.
It's the background in his house, not.
Ah, right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, you didn't ever work for a corporate though. Don't ask him about that. So.
No, I don't know. I guess I'm finding a lot of the discussion quite difficult. I really enjoyed Tim's point. I find a lot of it quite abstract, and the thing that's missing for me is really pushing how we could be using the kind of the digital element in this. I think that there's a lot of talk about just kind of a lot of kind of policy talk and a lot of top level things, but you know, the entrepreneurial side and driving education through that, I think the potential is in the digital. And I'm just kind of, I don't know, I'm finding it difficult to hook into the conversation because I'm not finding things that are being discussed that I can apply to real life. So, sorry.
Gavin, can I follow that? Yeah. Very quickly, if you actually look at where technology and ICTs appear in the SDGs, it's really interesting. They're only in 4 of the goals. And in the education goal, it isn't really anything to do with anything we're talking about or that Mark wants. It's to do with expanding the number of scholarships, least developed countries, vocational training, information communication technologies, you know, and it isn't about how we can actually use technology to make learning better.
What I would say on that is that, for me, the key thing about the digital is that it's not just about carrying on and doing what we were doing in more interesting or better ways, but it actually is about changing entirely our concept of how something works. And when you look at the kind of digital tsunamis that have affected other industries, the music industry, etc., you look at completely new business models and new approaches that effectively wipe out what was there before. And I think in education, everything is still very much a conversation about how can we take what we have had, which has been great over the centuries, but I think digital provides us opportunity to really radically change things and radically give education to many, many more people in ways that we just haven't dreamt of. And I just feel a lot of this debate is, you know, completely within the context of the old world rather than actually looking at things through the window of the new, a new world which hasn't yet appeared. And I think the education sector is quite far behind others, and there's, you know, that big change. We're still waiting to see how that will occur.
I think.
Okay,
if I can jump in. Sorry.
Bob, please.
Great point.
Yeah, no, can I just say what a fantastic platform that is for me, because it's a lovely building to what I would have said anyway, but thanks to Tim for that. I think this last week's been quite interesting. Andreas published a report at the back end of last week about the relationship, or rather non-relationship, between the investment in computers and PISA test scores. Fundamentally, I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is, what's the opportunity cost if we don't invest in technology for learning for all our people? And of course, Karen, this will resonate with all the work that Karen's done. I think if you dug beneath the headlines, as Andreas did, it wasn't the ones that got quoted in the BBC or anywhere, anything else. But actually what Andreas has said is, and this is the key point to what Tim's just said and what Mark's just said, what he's actually saying in the report, and what the report actually says, and to be honest, I don't know, Andreas, have you seen the Commonwealth for Learning report out yesterday on tablets. You've seen all that. I mean, what they're saying is throwing technology at something will not solve anything. And to use an old phrase, pouring new wine into old bottles actually won't work. And so what we really need to look at is what's the pedagogical issues? What are the obstacles to us changing the way that we teach and learn, and predominantly assess? You know, how many times have you heard me say we've still got the assessment tail wagging the pedagogical dog here? I know Andres will disagree with that, but that's essentially how it feels. And I think, you know, at least here in England, the constraints with the current ministers that we've got and their view about what teaching, learning and pedagogy is about is an enormous barrier to change. You know, add to what they think to how the Ofsted inspectors interpret teaching and learning, how you know, leadership and management and what's valued. We seem to be very good at valuing what we can measure and not very good at measuring what we can value.
Andres, I think I need to come back to you at this point and just...
Yeah, no, actually, I agree, and I think it brings us to Jim's earlier comment. You know, there are a small number of really innovative, great teachers, but the majority of teachers not changing their behavior. And whenever something like this happens, you know, you've got to ask yourself, you know, maybe we should look at a different work organization, a different learning environment to encourage people to be more entrepreneurial, to take greater risk. You know, we have actually data supporting this. You know, 3 out of 4 teachers basically consider school an innovation hostile environment, a very industrial work organization that rewards compliance, conformity, and that penalizes, you know, entrepreneurship, individual behavior. You know, we can throw as much technology at this as we want, and this is what our report clearly shows. You know, the investment in technology hasn't paid off because we haven't complemented the technology with the kind of 21st century pedagogy that leverages its potential. You know, it's actually true in every other organization as well. You know, if we just put computers there, we don't sort of make really active use out of this. You know, if students end up cutting and pasting stuff from Google, surely they're going to do worse in their thinking skills and creative skills than when they had to learn things by heart in the past. So this is really the issue that we are confronted with. And I think this is, for me, this entire sort of story about any goals we set ourselves. You know, the goals are a great framework or an aspiration, but we have to think about the work organization and learning environments that will get us there. It is not a question of money. You know, maybe in some parts of the development world, you know, money is a big constraint, but in the majority of countries that we're talking about, resources are not the issue. It is the way in which we work in education, and we've got to become better at this. And what we need for this is metrics for success. You know, I think any goal is only meaningful if we have a very clear way of actually measuring success. And it would be a disaster if any goal is framed, you know, again, in the metrics of the industrial work organization. If we basically start to count students, teachers, classrooms, school buildings, if that becomes the metric of success of the goals, we're just going to prolong the past. If we want to actually look at those goals in meaningful ways, we have to frame them exactly in the way this discussion is flowing, in terms of what is it that is going to make students successful? What are those kinds of learning outcomes that will make young people successful in today's and tomorrow's world? And then think hard, a lot harder about the work organization and learning environment. That is the story that our report brought out.
Yeah. Thank you, Andres. I think that's great.
I'd just like to...
And then,
I've always thought that copying and pasting, one thing is theft, but copying and pasting lots of things is for research, Andres. So I think that could lead to a skill. Sorry to be flippant, Gavin.
No, great. I just want the gentleman in the black sweater, the entrepreneur, who mentioned Mark. Hi, Mark.
Mark.
I just wanted to follow on from your comment about technology and the publishing businesses. I gave a presentation 2 or 3 years ago, and I showed in it how the publishing businesses had basically been disrupted by technology, film, music, media. So many teachers came up to me, I'm from those businesses, came up to me after the presentation and said, you gave perspective to what we're facing in the world today. I mean, we're in the middle of creating new business models for all of those industries. We're still trying to figure out how to make money in them. And that is the world that young people are going into. The traditional models are disappearing. And that's just the publishing business. So I do think if there was a way to, to use that information more when we talk about education and skills and the future and competencies, I think it would be helpful to teachers.
Vera.
Actually, I don't think there is any contradiction among the things that have been said here. We are dealing with a very complex problem or issue that is changing the way things happen, especially in education, that we are very, very indeed institutional. An institution and people in school is a very conservative institution. So actually I like Riel's approach of treating in different levels. So we have a micro, we have a meso, and we have a macro level. And if we cut the problem into this, we have here a good framework with the objectives that can lead us to a movement and to really enhance the possibilities of change that we are dealing with.
Thank you, Vera. Dominic.
Sure. Thanks, Gavin. I think the parallels with music and film industry are interesting, but one of the things that hasn't changed in those industries is the success criteria, that they're still judged successful based on how much money a particular product makes. So although technology has helped create new pathways into achieving that goal and revolutionize that aspect of the industry, the success criteria hasn't changed. Whereas in education, what we're talking about is changing assessment. And I think the point that you made about assessment being one of the biggest barriers to change is really valid, because for all the talk of disruptive technologies or innovation in curriculum, teachers and students are still judged and assessed successes or failures based on the system as it is now, rather than how it might be 5 or 10 years down the line. And I think that's why education is quite often seen as more risk averse than other comparable sectors, because the consequences of failure are enormous for the students who are part of that experiment.
Jim, do you want to come in on that point at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Just following on from my real life example, Marcus, I was a head teacher doing things on the ground. And for the people who don't know the English exam system in secondary schools, there are 2 key stages. The first key stage is 3 years long, 11, 12 and 13-year-olds, and the next key stage is 2 years long. The high stakes exams for the 16-year-olds mean that a lot of schools squeeze the curriculum for the 11, 12, 13 into 2 years. Then they spend an extra year on the examination to get the what I did, I actually abandoned 1 year from the curriculum, and we used the RSA's Practical Process Skills curriculum, and we call it the Learning to Learn year. Our exams still went up, so I believe you can, and we did things like problem solving, entrepreneurial skills, we did creative stuff. I believe that you can actually do both, and I think actually more than that, we have to do both, because the politicians will not allow things to change unless you can actually achieve the measures they value. And the ones that, to pick up Bob's point, we're measuring the things we really don't value, and we don't know how to measure the things we do. So there is but we have to do both at the same time, and you can. The problem is, and I said this earlier, I just want to repeat myself, but I think we talk about the 5%, the top end 5% of schools we visit, and expect the other 95% of teachers to actually miraculously change and leap over some chasm, and they're not going to. They're not going to. Those 5% are strange people. They are the innovative teachers. How do you get the early majority of teachers to change? It's old theory. It's a distribution curve, and we can't always just keep talking about the top. We have to talk about the middle as well, never mind the bottom. So that's why I'm keen to hear from people like Michael and Vera and people who've done it on the ground. Vera ran teacher training for Sao Paulo. There are answers out there, and we are failing to pass those answers on how to make change happen.
And I think that's a great point, because we have with Ramji and actually a great explanation of how that's being tackled, and it's not a simplistic pull a lever and it happens. It is actually about thinking through your strategy and making it work. Vera has that experience, as you've said, in Sao Paulo, and Michael's been doing and working at this for really 15 years. well, look far too young for that.
Started when he was 5.
But been working to do that, and that's where actually giving voice to those innovators doing the real work on the ground, and it's where I just challenge the notion that we're just talking policy at a high level. What we're doing is actually giving examples and pulling those through.
One quick point, Gavin. I totally agree with what Jim just said, and I think that it's really important for us all to share practices as much as possible. At Taking It Global, we try to share everything we do as much as possible in Creative Commons, both our youth guides to action. We just completed a social innovation camp this summer. We ran 5 of them, and we're now sharing that curriculum out. So I think, as Jim said, as much as we can showcase these innovations, but also as innovators, I think we all have a responsibility and opportunity to share. And I'm sure even with the world's biggest lesson, we've been excited to kind of check that out here. And it's great to share those models. So I think one great takeaway for this conversation might be for all of us to look at how we can share these goals and ways for teachers to get involved and bring them into the classroom and create resources that are open that help people do that.
I think there was one point here about, sorry, who was?
Gavin, can I just add to this takeaways point? No problem. It seems to me that there's the goals are one issue, the how-to is another. If we and obviously sharing best practices is a very positive thing, but I hear another takeaway that to me challenges to a certain extent aspects of what we might consider continuity, and that has to do with the metrics issue. And I think that there's a profound challenge, which is not only profound but something that is exceedingly difficult for us to grasp because we're blinded to it, which is the metaphors we use, the language we use about preparation, about development for the future, about navigation, navigation, preparation implies somehow we can know where we're going, what we're going to do for the future. And our metrics about achievement are often couched in those terms. Have we achieved the awareness, the knowledge of what we think we need to know in order to be prepared, in order to be able to contribute to development in the future? And that's becoming, that's about what we will become. But being in the present has another set of metrics, and it has to do with improvisation and wisdom and changing the very premises of your navigation to take on other goals and to use other vehicles. And I think that we have a profound imbalance in the way in which we conceptualize the metrics that we need in order to create learning societies. And that's about the how-to. And we need to be able to have, out of debates like this, I think, some willingness to go out on a limb and say, look, if we don't begin to rebalance this issue of how we use the future, and I hate to be the one who always puts the word future into the discussion, but it's a very, very powerful component of everything we do and see and hear and care about. And if we can't introduce it in an explicit way, I think we won't be able to take the steps that we need to introduce the metrics that we care about.
It's a really interesting point, I think, because it plays, I think, to what Kathy was going to say about higher education.
Yes, I think we need to, look at the end of the journey and then work back. And what I mean by that is, I speak as a parent that went through the K through 12 system in this country, and I definitely found that parents were very focused on the end of the journey. Higher education, the success to them was about getting their kids into certain types of schools. So any change that you're going to bring about in curriculum and what are the important competencies, you have to get the parents on board and you have to get the higher education institutions on board. Because as long as there is a system where scores in certain types of tests and a certain type of pathway is about getting to the next step, we're not going to see the change we want. I mean, it's the environment is great for having this discussion and this change, but we need more education for parents and more education for some of these institutions, perhaps, that really are put on these pedestals and that is where people are going in their education journey. So I just put that out there. I mean, has anybody experienced this themselves as a parent?
I think there's a really important point about the constraining nature of that. I want to go to Andrew Grayley, please.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. I was thinking it's fascinating sitting on this for the first time, contributing this way, and I will park my corporate duty. I do work for a corporate, Mark, but I'm coming from the other side.
Nothing behind you. That says public.
I'm a pragmatist, and if you take a look at the definition of the word pragmatist, it means somebody that likes to achieve a goal. And what I'm trying to understand is how we're going to achieve these goals and get this message out on the street to the public as a whole. I spoke to a neighbour of mine yesterday. I spoke to my mum last week. I said, we've got this debate going on with the Sustainable Development Goals. And they didn't have a clue. And, I think coming back from society, from the general public, to help in some way, put pressure on to make sure that these goals are achieved, especially number 4, and the infrastructure that goes with helping number 4 for education. I'm trying to understand how we can measure those goals. I know there's kits online for each of the member countries. I know that they document it in some way. But to achieve some of the goal, I think sets a bad example. It's no example at all if it's not achieved.
The purpose of education fast forward, Gavin and myself have been talking about this for many, many years, is that we just had this belief that people don't know what's going on. Teachers didn't know about the changes in education. Teachers hadn't heard of the MDGs when we asked them. 15 years in MDGs, and most teachers I spoke to didn't know about them. So we thought that this debate would be about how can we help the United Nations spread the news, because this is one of the main aims about EFF. EFF is about reach, getting out and making people hear about issues and then making their own mind up about what they want to do. But Mark's sort of comments made me think that we're in our own goldfish bowl here and we follow our own language, but we aren't doing a good enough job at making that accessible to everybody. And literally, and Kathy makes the point that everybody isn't teachers, it's parents and citizens, and it's everybody. And the last part of the video is making this point. The SDGs aren't meant to be from on high down. In fact, they weren't constructed like that. But unless we get the message out and build, somebody used the word movement. Was it Karen? I think somebody mentioned it's about a movement. But unless we can actually articulate what the movement is about and what it can achieve, whether that's economic or social or environmental, which I think are the 3 words, and education, Ramji, then we'll be back here next year saying we still haven't reached enough people. So I think it's our language is one of the problems, that we're talking on a level people just don't get. Because to me, I'm hearing lots of practical things, but Mark heard none. That for me is a really interesting debating point in itself.
Tell you what, I'm going to go to John now to do his homework and let us know what's going on Twitter. Is there anything major coming through, major themes?
Thank you, Gavin. A couple of things. Rather than try to bring everything in, I'll mention just 2 or 3 specific points which are being repeated and coming up again and again. One point I would make in response to something that Riel Miller mentioned. He mentioned the concept of the Learning Society, and if anyone that isn't aware of it, they should be aware of this particular book by Joe Stiglitz, Creating a Learning Society, which is a book that could be mistaken for an economics textbook, but in fact it's probably one of the most important education books published in the last 10, maybe 20 years, and it's really worth looking at in the context of what we're talking about today, actually. But in terms of the Twitter debate, a couple of people are mentioning the fact that, apart from some mentions of Asia and 1 or 2 other areas in the world, we haven't mentioned Africa much, if at all. And of course, some of the most basic and the deepest problems we have are in sub-Saharan Africa, and it would be good to get some mention and some realities around what's going on in that part of the world. I know that UNESCO are heavily embedded in, certainly in education and teacher training and other areas in that part of the world. It would be good to hear something about that. Another couple of interesting points, one again from Lars Persson, given the context of what's happening in the world today, particularly here in Europe, How do we deal with education and migration and education? Because they're both really important. Maybe it's not something that relates specifically and directly to the SDGs, but it's certainly an issue that we need to take on board. There's a few mentions of, I think, raised by one of the comments from Andreas about how formal education is fundamentally a conservative environment. It's an innovation, it doesn't like innovation. And I think certainly the concept of the school is a construct that we need to keep going back to, because it's the construct of the concept of the school that is fundamentally problematic in that regard. And you know, the debates that we've had in the past about, you hear people using the mantra, we should talk about pedagogy first, technology second. To me, that's a nonsense, because they're in dialectical opposition to each other. You can't have one without the other, and we need both constantly to interact with each other. You know, saying technology first, pedagogy second would be just as nonsensical, basically. Just one or two other quick points. Again, on technology, the idea of trying to use technology radically is something that most formal education institutions at all levels, whether at school level, local, national, even international level, don't really yet, or haven't really yet grasped and taken on board. Most of the time, even when they use the rhetoric of using it radically, they're really just using technology to do what has been done before, maybe a little bit faster, a little bit more effectively, or whatever. And we need to change that debate. So those are the main points that I'm saying, and there are lots of others, Gavin, lots of others, but we just don't have time to go through them all. But it's a very rich conversation that's happening at the moment, so thank you.
That's brilliant. I mean, it's encouraging from all kinds of points of view, from that maybe we are making a little bit of an impression, and it's not trying to make an impression on our own behalf, but it's that trying to bring everybody into the conversation, to make it available and to extend the reach of these, the launch of the SDGs in this case, but also in the past, the other debates that we've had. I'd just like also to say that we had expected to have Zimbabwe on the call, so one of the reasons for perhaps the less of a focus in Africa was that unfortunately we haven't been able to make that link at the moment. Jim, you want to say something?
Yeah, we also lost Egypt, and we lost Lebanon, and we lost Bangalore in India. It's one of those days. And just, you know, Polycom have been wonderful. We did all the tests yesterday. It all worked. Something's happened today. You know, that's called life. But one or two tweets saying this looks like a very Western middle class debate. You know, where is the rest of the world? So hopefully I've just explained we did try to bring the rest of the world in. But the concept is we're a bit of an antidote to the normal conference, where people will go into a closed room with maybe 200 or 300 people, and what's said in the room largely stays in the room. So our purpose in life is to give anybody, because this is being live streamed, you know, if someone has got access to technology, they can see it after the event as well. So that way we're taking the normal conference room wider. Once in the past, we had someone from Sierra Leone, we bought equipment so they could take a copy of the debate and show it in villages, because that debate was on peace, if you remember, in July 2012. Whenever it was.
At his request.
At his request, because he'd seen it somewhere else. So this is all about getting the message out. And the people on the call are chosen because they have something wise to say about this topic, and all angles to this, you know, from not thinking that they can work unless we change our opinions, through to we're not communicating well enough. So that's the idea. The tweeting is going mad. The volume is huge. So our record so far is 23 million timeline deliveries in 2 hours. Maybe we'll beat that today, we'll see. But that's one of our measures to reach a lot of people.
Andreas, do you want to come in on some of the points there?
No, again, you know, I think we're discovering sort of covering many issues here, but I really think if we want to make those goals work, and I think we'll have to, you know, the world will reward the knowledge and skills and attitudes of people more and more in the future. So if we want to make this work, we have to think hard about how are we going to, you know, measure and monitor success, you know, help those who are struggling, whether it's in individual classroom, in schools, whether it's entire countries. This is, I think, something that I'm not sure is getting yet the attention that it really needs to.
Yeah, I think there's a whole big argument, and maybe we need to dig into this in another place. You know, our testing and measurement systems are so much about are essentially a proxy for something, and the proxy that they're for is actually doing something real. And I get excited when we talk about the 5 areas, and when we talk about those 5 areas and actually encouraging children to do real things within those 5 areas, and assessing that and assessing what they achieve in it, rather than doing another exam to see that they know something in physics. No harm to physics. I know it's important, but it's actually thinking differently about how we do it. And I think that's, for me anyway, that's one of the great opportunities of these goals coming through, because it will create a certain, it may not do the things that we want them to do, they may not be successful in the way that everybody would like, but on the other hand, it is an impetus. And that impetus creates a little bit of the opportunity to effect greater innovation. I'm going to go to Michael on that, because you're smiling, so that's a lesson to you. Don't smile unnecessarily. I don't mean it.
No,
you
I think...
smile as much as you like.
No, that's okay. I think it's a good point. I think for us, one of our goals, and I know we've been tweeting out this morning in terms of the diversity, we're really thrilled to be able to engage more young people, more educators in this conversation from all over the world. And so we hope to continue to do that. And I think the kind of point around it's all great, but how do we actually distribute and make sure that these goals get out and get visibility? That's really our goal over the coming weeks and months. And we'd love to collaborate with anyone interested in working on that, because I think unless educators, parents, unless everyone is aware of that and aware of these goals and aware of the momentum and aware of what they can do and how they can convert that into action in their classroom, then it's kind of all lost opportunity. So, on Saturday, we'll be running a design thinking workshop for 150 student leaders from across Canada, and we're using the global goals as the framework, both for the students and the teachers, to develop ideas and projects on. And we hope to model and share that as an opportunity for anyone to use. So this is really at the heart of our quest. And yeah, you're right, it has been 15 years, but I think there's still a long way to go.
No, that's brilliant, and I wish there was a little Polycom button here to press saying real action, just so that it's flagged. This is something real that is happening. Don't worry. Thank you. Karen.
Yeah, thank you. And Michael loves to collaborate with you all. We're excited about the work you've been doing, and I think that what I also like is that feels like forward momentum. Some comments are sort of like, stop, nothing's happening. And Andrew, I would love to congratulate you on finding 2 people who didn't know about the goals so that you had the opportunity to tell them. So if everybody would go out and find 10 people around them that don't know and not say, why don't you know? Instead say, my opportunity.
Actually, it's probably a good thing that they don't know. It'll do them much more good, so they'll be able to do something worthwhile.
And Tim, as we, I had my degree in early childhood education, and when we dealt with young children who were sort of obstinate like that, I would say, what's your idea? So I would love to hear from, what is
read my blog,
what is an idea?
not my lips.
So the other thing that I would say is, on the other positive side of this is, there are so many amazing stories of things happening throughout the world, stories of excellence. So when we have comments like, our investments haven't paid off, or nobody's doing this, or we don't know how, or teachers don't know how, or things like that, I think it diminishes an amazing amount of energy and power that actually we can harness and stand on. So yes, it's not happening in far too many places. There are incredible inequities across the world, and let's find the places and the ways and the things that are happening so that we can try to scale those, replicate those, share those, and empower every single person to do some little thing. So if everybody leaves this debate thinking about what is the one thing I can do, I won't pick 17 goals, I'll pick one. This is my favorite, this is the one I think is incredibly important. How do I engage people around me in this particular goal? So there's just amazing comments in Twitter and amazing power in the number of people that are engaging in this debate. And yes, it's a verbal sort of text-based debate, but there also are just so many powerful stories that we can stand on. Thank you.
Just want to comment real quick.
One comment from Elaine, and then I'll go to Tim and then Carolina.
Just real quick though, I see that students that are having access to what we are all talking about today, I think that when they go from, the parent thing, the Alaska example that I gave you, those parents all have access to watch and view what those students are doing. And then those students, as they progress in their education, they're expecting to have all the things that they have available to them now. And so I think the more that we share, and that's one of the things that I do, is I connect those great examples of people doing amazing things and filling in some of these goals that you have. They're just going to continue to keep talking and expecting, coming in, why isn't this university doing this? So I think that's, that will kind of trickle down, and we can expose, what you guys are doing here with these goals, but the students are going to be the ones driving it, because they've seen how it works in their own environment.
There's a big message there, I think, about feeding the movement.
Yes.
And really, it's what Jim and I have talked about a lot with Education Fast Forward. It's just, we're not trying to make our own movement. We're just trying to actually feed the movement for moving education forward more quickly. And by reaching people in a variety of different ways, then that's what I hope we do. So, Tim.
Karen, I'll come back to you. I'm a real optimist and I'm a practical person. I do things. Let's look at target 4.1. By 2030, ensure that all girls, for those who may not remember what it says, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable and quality primary and secondary education, ... We're never going to make all primary and secondary education free. There are large movements across the world who believe it's better to pay for education. Quality, and another point, quality education. How we define quality education in France is totally different from how somebody would define quality education in Malawi. What are the indicators? We want the best learning opportunities, not so much education, for everybody across the world. That goal is crass. So that target, target.
It's the targets, and I think there is something here actually about how you cut and slice this, and I think I go back to actually my early comments about contextualization. I think this is it gives us an opportunity to take and contextualize which parts of this we wish to work with. Carolina.
Yes, thank you. I was just wanted to add a point in relation to one of those Twitter messages about the African realities. What we can say, and also in relation to one of the components of quality education, is the role that teachers play. In many of the African contexts, we are facing acute teacher shortages. And at the same time that we need to deal with our own quality of how well trained these teachers are, how motivated they are, how well resourced they are. So that's now in the agenda. We have them as means of implementation. But it's an incredible challenge that we're facing in this context, and especially in how we have qualified teachers deployed where they're needed the most, especially in rural areas. Many times we have this inequity in you can have national figures, but when you look into the urban and rural differences, it's a considerable challenge.
Thank you, Carolina. Ramji.
Well, to what Jim said, I think one of the key challenges is how do you communicate whatever it is that you're trying to achieve? And listing 169 goals and so on, you might be ticking the boxes, but you're not going to communicate very much, okay? So as a famous sculptor said, simplicity is complexity resolved. So how do we get to that point? And this is a challenge that I faced in my own organization with some 600-800 teachers, telling them that our mission is to spark curiosity is a pretty good message, but it hasn't really gone through, because what is curiosity and so on and so forth, and you have any number of discussions. So we came up with a simpler but not trivial mantra. We said, the
conference recording has ended.
Are, aha, and ha-ha. Okay? Aha, and ha-ha. And we explained what each meant. And all of a sudden, we found the group completely energized. Yeah. And people at the grassroots going into the schools knew exactly what the mission was. or maybe, you know, 80 or 90% of it. So how we communicate is really important. And that's a challenge that Gavin, Jim, all of us have in getting the message across, in stimulating people to want to join a movement if there is one, and making a difference. For instance, using the word pedagogy, it's a simple thing. It's not a word that I used to use as a banker, obviously. And the first time I heard it, I wasn't sure what pedagogy meant. And now I use it all the time in a lot of my talks, and people from outside the education sector always come up to me and say, great talk, except, you know, your use of that word pedagogy, that really sort of took away from it. So how we speak, how we communicate, the words we use, I think becomes very important.
Right.
Small point, but I just thought
and
really
more
important.
so, and even more so as a media person today, because the way we write, the way we use words, the way we use pictures has become so much more important. So communicating to the masses has completely changed than when I was a full-time, you know, working media person before my children.
Right.
So that's important as well.
It is different. And at this stage, I need to go to Dominic, I think, because we are coming towards the end. And Dominic, I think you're going to say a few words to sum things up.
Sure.
Then I hope hand back before the very end, which is in just a few minutes' time.
I'll give you a cue.
It's been a really rich and interesting debate, and one of the tensions which has come through at a couple of points is the observation at the very beginning that goals are a great opportunity for looking to the future, but the fact that teachers and students who are in the system now are judged and assessed on how it operates in the here and now. So I think we've been having two parallel conversations, and one is about the need for an iterative approach to change within the existing system, which allows for contextualization and the gentle introduction of new skills into the curriculum, so the focus on 21st century skills or core skills within the current curriculum. And it was really encouraging to hear how PISA and OECD are already starting to reflect that with their new testing system. And then in parallel, the opportunity to think more holistically about the kind of wholesale change which is required to give education this 21st century relevance, which so many of us recognize that it currently doesn't have. And it's around that aspect of the debate that we're able to look at how we build the movement for change and how we start communicating much more widely to a broader public than just the education community, what the purpose of the global goals are. One of the other key themes, and this is the final point that I wanted to make, one of the other key themes which has come throughout the debate is the need for greater knowledge sharing, and the idea of how do you transmit what you see working in a relatively small scale pilot or experiment, how do you take that to scale and share that across different countries and across different education systems. And so debates like this are a really good forum for doing that kind of thing. So it only remains to thank EFF for hosting the debate. It's an incredibly timely moment to do it and for bringing all of us together. And Gavin, I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you, Dominic. That's really good and really good points there at the end. So I'd like to weave a few moments more. Jim, do you want to add anything?
Just before just before it all closes down, you know, these debates don't happen without an awful lot of effort behind the scenes. And we almost feel for Polycom, who've given all these facilities free of charge, and have had a few problems with this. So, you know, don't worry about it, Andrew. It's been great. So thank you. You know, there's been a great support of getting this to happen. Maybe we've had a richer debate by having less people on it. So that was maybe the plan. But there is some truth in that. But the whole range of organisations, from European SchoolNet to Vector to Nesta, and companies that give us tiny amounts of money. We could do with more, you know, Toshiba, Microsoft and others, Imagine Education. But it's a huge number of people behind the scenes that make this sort of thing happen. There's no point in doing it, though, unless we pick up Karen's point and find 10 people and either tell them not to look at the goals or to look at the goals, whichever way around it is. Tim was right, by the way. It is 169, not 100. 107. I said 179. Tim was exactly right. It's 169.
Exaggeration.
Making it even harder, yeah. See, they've gone down by 10 already, Tim. You've had an impact on
Keep going, keep going.
Our aim is to actually see what we do as an agenda going forward. So we are talking again. Another team that couldn't get on today is the National Red Cross and Crescent Federation from Geneva. They actually train 17 million volunteers globally. 17 million, and they're really interested in the behaviours of their volunteers when they're empathising with the people they're dealing with. So I think the shift that I'm hearing is one from, I think Andreas's point, away from skills and knowledge to applying those. And I call those behaviours. You know, how you behave with what you know rather than what you know. So for me, I've got some big takeaways, and I hope we can carry out the next EFF in November and carry on the debate in a way where we're encouraging people to do something practical on the ground.
I think that's a really good point. That's always been our intention with Education Fast Forward. It's lovely to have debates, discussions, but unless that results in something on the ground, which is why I took Mark's point so heavily, as it were. This is all about inciting and encouraging action, encouraging the courage to take action, because you know you're not alone, and being part of the movement that is Education Fast Forward, for what it's worth, is to try to make a real difference on the ground. So
schools actually had a curriculum with the 5 Ps.
I think I'm a bit worried about the 5P curriculum, because that sounds a bit cheap if you're in England.
That's an English joke, yeah.
That's an English joke, sorry. But there you go. It just remains for me to thank everybody who has taken part in this, and I mean everybody. So if you've listened to the video stream, thank you. It's great. If you've tweeted, and I hope you have, thank you. If you've been on one of these Polycom centres, and thank you for taking part in the debate and giving of your time and giving of your ideas. Thanks for all the discussion. Thanks to our presenters. So thank you to Carolina for starting things off. Thank you to Karen, and my mind's gone now.
In his absence, Dr. Shouki from Canal.
I was going to say, that's right, Dr. Shouki, who tried to get there from Egypt. So Jim stood in on his behalf. So thank you, Jim, for doing that. Thank you for making it a really lively debate. Please look out for the next debate, which will be, we plan in November, and look at the EFF14.org website to pick up on that. But go away and do something about this. Remember the bit at the beginning. I really do believe it's ask not what the world can do for you, but what we can do for the world. It's our contribution, each of our contributions individually, that really counts. Wherever we take them and however we contextualize them, go and do something. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we close there.
Thanks for sharing, Gavin.
Welcome, Gavin. Thank you.